With tensions in Ukraine not so much de-escalating as on pause, it leaves us with only speculation for what this opaque country is planning in the future. What is Russia going to do in the years to come? And what is so important about Ukraine that Russia would risk war with NATO just to regain control of the region? Being more planet-sized than country, Russia is absolutely obsessed with anchoring its massive empire with natural geographic boundaries. There is a reason why Russia is so big. Its core isn't well defended, so Russia needs to anchor its borders with geographical barriers and borderlands to make defense easier. The Polish Gap, the Baltic coast, the Carpathian Mountains, the Bessarabian Gap, and the Fennoscandian tundra. All examples of borderlands and barriers that Russia and other Russian powers have used in the last 400 years. Russia would consolidate the mountains and other barriers and focus troops on the gaps. Russia's lack of defense on this flank has been exploited not once, not twice, not thrice, not quadrice, not quintice, but at least sextice times in the last 400 years. During the Cold War, Russia controlled every single geographical feature in the area to make Russia as secure as physically possible. That strategy worked, until it didn't. By the Soviet collapse, this borderland became the territory of new states that were hostile to Russia. NATO, once stretching to West Berlin, 1,300 kilometers from the Russian core, was now a stone's throw away from Russia's second largest city. Remember how Russia's border with Ukraine is completely flat? If horror of horrors, Ukraine slided towards relations with NATO and the EU, Ukraine could be used as a launchpad toward a defenseless Moscow, or at least as leverage for the West to restrain Russia from Western Europe, a primary reason for Russia's invasion in 2014. Taking control of Ukraine would mean that Kiev would no longer be a drain on Russian defense policy. Russia doesn't need the Donbass war to end. It only needs to keep it smouldering long enough so that the West doesn't take notice. But annexation would be preferable. After the end of the Soviet Union, Russia was left with fewer people and longer and more vulnerable borders. Although still a Goliath in Europe, it pales in comparison to the Soviet giant, and so old Soviet tactics of using sheer numbers had to change. Russia today mostly opts for soft power, energy being one of the many cards in its deck it can use as leverage. Countries like Moldova, Estonia, Poland, Latvia, Slovakia, Finland, Bosnia, Macedonia, Croatia, Bulgaria, Serbia, and Germany source a large proportion of their natural gas, oil, and coal from Russia, and in the case of some of them, nearly 100%. And because Russia always loves a good bit of leverage on its side, Germany, who depends on Russia for 15 to 25% of their total energy consumption, is far less likely to criticize Russian actions than the UK, who has far less Russian dependence. And since most of these pipelines flow through Ukraine, which has the ability to turn those pipelines off, Russia needs to regain control of Ukraine to avoid Russia losing its biggest industry billions of dollars. But with the construction of Nord Stream 2 almost finished, a new pipeline that will bypass Ukraine entirely, Ukraine's value in energy will be significantly diminished, but will still remain somewhat of a thorn in Russia's side. Russia, although not being a stranger to the ocean blue, never fully consolidated its home on the waves, and the one time it did almost become a naval superpower, it was brutally torn down at Crimea. With natural harbours and mountain buffers in the middle of the Black Sea, control of Crimea meant control of the entire sea, and by extension, influence over the whole region. Crimea adds strategic value, heaps of it, but the real treasure of Crimea may be its oil and gas deposits. Before 2014, half of all of Ukraine's oil and gas was under Crimea. After the annexation, Ukraine was left more energy dependent on Russia, and Russian energy companies could drill from another source as supplies in Siberia become less feasible to extract. Two birds with one annexation. Russia needs Ukraine for geographical protection, for energy security, for its strategic Crimean Peninsula, for its wheat production, and for using nationalistic sentiment to hold the country together. Ukraine since 2014 has been caught in an endless and smouldering conflict that has hurt its development and reopened old scars. Ukraine for all purposes is now a state on thin ice, with a hungry Russia waiting across the border for the West to be distracted enough so that the Russian army can finally go in for the kill. This video is already long enough, and there are more reasons for Russian interest in Ukraine. This video only went over 3 main points. For now, like in 2014, Russia will put on its friendly face and wait for a perfect day when the world is distracted to finish the job it started 7 years ago.